So there's a scene in Blade Runner 2049, the sequel, which if you haven't seen it is actually a really good movie. And there's this shot from the movie where Ryan Gosling, he's playing this character named Kay, is looking up at an enormous pink and purple hologram of this beautiful woman, and she's his AI girlfriend. I looked this up because I couldn't remember the details of the movie. Her name is Joy. She's a fake AI girlfriend, and the shot is just this iconic image of this little man in front of this enormous spectral woman. And I can't get that shot out of my head because I promise it has to do with the subject of today's episode, which is the last few passages of Aeneid Book 2. Right, we're back in the Aeneid this week. We've been working our way through Book 2, which is Aeneas' story of how Troy fell and how he escaped. And now we're going to close the story out, or at least this portion of the story. We're going to come to the end of Book 2. We left on kind of a cliffhanger last time. We saw Neoptolemus, the deranged, nihilist, crazed son of Achilles, who has none of Achilles' honor, but is just raw will to power, this kind of ugly, unmasked Greek savagery, comes and he kills Priam, the king of Troy, and he does it in the most gruesome and impious way possible at the altars, in the courtyard, in front of everybody. We've had first the death of Priam's son in front of Priam, and then the death of Priam himself. Neoptolemus sends him down to the underworld, and all of this is witnessed by Aeneas himself. And now we're going to pick up right at that point in the story, and it is a turning point for Aeneas. It's the moment when he realizes something new about his destiny that's going to stick with him for the whole rest of the story. It's deeply painful, it's deeply important, formative, and it will define the journey of Aeneas going forward. Because up until this point, he has still basically been living in a Homeric poem. He's been acting like a Homeric hero, thinking that his job is to go down with his city, to die at Troy, to die defending the walls or protecting the king. Now something snaps within him, and we're going to see what that does today. We're also going to meet the love jelly at the center of this war donut. So if you've been following along at home with our series, which, by the way, if you haven't, you should subscribe wherever you're listening right now. Not too late to get every new episode when you hit subscribe on Apple or YouTube or wherever you're listening. Just smash that subscribe button and we will carry on through the Aeneid. If you've been following along from the beginning, I've been talking about ring composition, this idea that you have one theme at the beginning of a story that then comes back at the end of the story. And then maybe you have a second theme at the next part of the story that then comes back right before the end of the story. And so you get these kind of loops or these rings or these wheels within wheels. And the Aeneid, at least in this first section, operates with a giant kind of ring structure that plays themes of love against themes of war. So we've had a big love scene that kicks us off into this story, the love that gets going between Dido, Queen Dido of Carthage, and Aeneas. And in that love story, she asks to tell a war story. She asks for the war story of Troy from Aeneas. So now we're in the war part of the story. And that war story of Troy takes up two books, Book 2 and Book 3. But we're right in the middle of that now. We're at the core of the war story within the love story because we're coming to the end of Book 2. And that means we're going to get a little center part of this that is love again, the love between Aeneas and his first wife, Creusa. And Creusa is the Joy, the AI girlfriend in the Blade Runner of the Iliad story. She is the giant woman that floats in a kind of spectral form at the center of this extremely moving part of the story. You're going to have to forgive me because I am still not over Creusa. Aeneas has to leave Creusa behind. She dies in Troy. And this was a section of the poem that I read when I was first in high school, and it absolutely crushed me. It just gutted me. And I'm still not over the sadness of leaving Creusa behind. And one of the things I want to show you today is that sadness of having to say goodbye to somebody who must die and fall with the city is the whole point of what Virgil is teaching us in this passage, in this section of the poem. What he's showing us is that the great endeavor which lies before Aeneas, even though it is fated, even though it is the god's will for him to go forth and become a founder of what will become a great nation, even though all of that is true, it's still going to be tragic. And Virgil is going to stare straight in the face of the tragedy. So we're going to get into all of that. But first, I want to check in and ask how your diet and exercise routine is going in 2025. And I mean this genuinely. I would love to hear from you. And I have in the past really enjoyed hearing from my listeners about how your fitness regimen is going. I know there are some people who over the course of like 2020 to 25 have joined me in really getting that stuff locked down. And I've been really glad this year to bring you a key portion of that routine for me, which is Field of Greens. So Field of Greens is in the diet area of the fitness world, which is really important. You can lift as heavy as you want, you can run as far as you want, but you can't out-train a bad diet. So those of us that are into fitness know that you gotta take care of what you eat. And it's not just because it'll make you look good, it's because it'll make you feel good, and because it's a matter of self-respect to not be shoving your face full of food. This is a classical idea that we should have restraint in our appetites and put in right order all the things that we desire. We can get this in Aristotle, we can get this in Plato, all of that well and good, right? Big part of our lives and the lifespan of this show. Also, though, we're all human, and we can sit here and we can talk about the abstractions and the philosophy of keeping your appetites in check, but you and I both know that there's no such thing as a perfect diet, nor should there be. You want to have a little wiggle room, you want to be able to do a cheat meal from time to time, and you want a basic structure in place so you know you're getting your good nutrients, even when you purposefully go off the rails a little bit, like I tend to do on the weekends. So this is what Field of Greens is there to do. It's there to give you that baseline, kind of like nutritional armor, with a daily drink that contains the optimal servings of fruits and vegetables, which otherwise very, very hard to get. It's really hard to calibrate meticulously all the many fruits and vegetables that you're supposed to be eating. Ideally, none of us really have time in the day to be measuring all of that out. We have better things to be doing. So Field of Greens does it for you. Each fruit and vegetable is doctor selected for a specific health benefit. There's a heart group, lungs and kidney groups, metabolism, healthy weight, basically whatever your fitness goals are, wherever you're at with that stuff, Field of Greens can support you and help you as you move forward in that. I have found that my skin is clearing up. It's getting way better than it sometimes has been in the past. I've had acne stuff before, but not anymore. There are all kinds of health benefits, better energy, metabolism support, weight control, all of that stuff. And it's all well supported by Field of Greens. If you drink Field of Greens daily, they guarantee that the next time you go to your doctor, he will notice an improvement in your health. He or she, I should say, will notice an improvement in your health, or you get your money back. But I don't think you're going to want your money back, especially because if you listen to me, if you stick with me, I get you an excellent 20% discount off your first order when you use the code Heretics at checkout, just like in the title of the show, HERETICS at fieldofgreens.com. That's fieldofgreens.com. Use the offer code Heretics to get started with your first order and 20% off from me. Okay, so back to Aeneas and his journey, his staggering journey through the ruins or the burning buildings of Troy. Priam has just died. When Aeneas sees Priam killed, he goes through something very similar to what happens to Achilles when he sees Priam weeping and begging for Hector's body back. At the end of the Iliad, there's a very moving scene, which we did read together on the show, where Priam, the old man, comes and begs Achilles for the body of his dead son, Hector. And Achilles at this point is feral. He's in beast mode. He's totally driven mad by grief, but he sees this old man, this father, this king, in a position of utter vulnerability and supplication and prayer to him, to Achilles, and this unloosens something within him, in his heart. He remembers his own father, Peleus, and he thinks of all who have died in the war, and they weep together. It's profoundly striking. It changes the course of the rest of the poem, and it allows for the catharsis, the end or the resolution of that grief in war that brings the poem to its conclusion. So that's what happens at the end of the Iliad. This is a much darker version of that, but it's absolutely a callback to the same idea, because Aeneas sees the death of Priam, sees this pitiful, piteous old man who has now suffered his last indignity. And he, Aeneas, instantly remembers his family. He's been on this crazed, almost suicidal mission into the heart of burning Troy as timber falls around him and buildings go up in flame and everyone's choked with smoke. And he remembers at this moment, suddenly seeing Priam die, that he's left behind three key people to fend for themselves in the mayhem. He's left behind Creusa, his wife, whom we already mentioned. He's left behind Iulus, or Ascanius, that is the son, his son, who will become the ancestor of the Emperor Augustus. That's somebody we've talked about before on previous episodes. And he's left behind Anchises, his father, the pater familias in Roman terms. If you were a Roman, you would think of Anchises really as the head of this household. Even though Aeneas is fully adult and has his own wife and children, the oldest male in the family, in the patrilineal line, would be, in some very real sense, the kind of king of this little mini kingdom that is the family. So Virgil traces this chain of thought from the dead father Priam to Father Anchises, to Aeneas' own father, and then straight to Creusa next, followed by Iulus. And it's really important that Creusa comes up as a central figure here. It's important artistically because she's going to close out the book. She's going to be the end of book 2, but also because emotionally, we need to know that Aeneas cares about Creusa. There was a very prevalent idea when I was in school, which I think was really wrong, that Creusa gets short shrift here, that there's something about the misogyny or the patriarchal nature of Roman society that makes Creusa into a footnote or an afterthought. She's the one that's going to get left behind, and as we're going to see, the father and son, Ascanius and Anchises, are both going to get carried out of Troy. And this is the iconic image which we see in the sculpture of Bernini, which is very, very famous. I'll put it up on YouTube if you're watching, where Aeneas carries the gods of his household, the Lares and Penates, and he carries his father Anchises on his shoulder, and he's got Ascanius, his boy, at his side, and Creusa's not there. And so this is sometimes trotted out as evidence that these callous Romans, they thought of women as expendable, as second-class citizens. But that's not only a very simplistic reading of the text, it also fails to make sense of the text. The text doesn't make any sense unless Creusa is crucially important, deeply important, and valued to Aeneas. Virgil makes clear that she comes right up on his mind. Subiit deserta Creusa. Creusa abandoned, came up for me. I remembered her, essentially, is what he's saying. And unless we understand that Creusa is cherished among the other members of the family, and in fact respected as, in some sense, strong, as a part of the family's strength, we won't understand everything that happens next. So I think it's crucial to note here that Creusa is important on Aeneas' mind, because a lot of people will say, oh, Creusa, she's kind of a throwaway character. Not so, and I will stick to my guns about this and die on this hill because I'm still not over her. But so she comes up on his mind. But then, before he can do the natural thing, which is to run back home, sprint back and try to find his family and save them, he sees somebody else. He sees the daughter of Tyndareus, says Virgil, and that's Helen. Helen of Troy, whom we have met many a time before. She is, in some sense, the cause of this whole mess. It's because Helen was abducted by Paris, Alexander, brother of Hector. It was because of that, and because of the trial of the three goddesses, and because of this terrible love affair, that the whole war started, and distantly, through a chain of events, kind of butterfly effect, it's Helen who has now caused Priam to be dead. And Aeneas feels this very, very deeply. He looks upon her and says, there's no real honor in killing this poor defenseless woman, but man, do I want to. Why should she go free? Why should she be allowed to go home? Why should she have her homeland restored and get back to her own kind of native princessdom, queendom, while Priam lies bleeding on the floor? There's no glory in killing this woman, but he really, really wants to. And this is a classic theme. Virgil is engaging here with one of the oldest ideas in Greek mythology and literature, that it's all Helen's fault. Now, if you want to find misogyny, if you want to talk about anti-woman sentiments, don't look for Creusa. But this part of Greek mythology and Greek literature does, I think, have a fair bit of hostility toward female sexuality. And it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not like this is something that Virgil and the Greeks are just making up. It's about the dangers of getting enticed and seduced, essentially, by mere physical beauty. But in the course of that allegory, Helen as an allegory for the doomed or the disastrous beauty, Helen herself as the person, as the individual, falls in for the most savage blame. She's utterly done dirty in the Greek tradition, and especially in tragedy, which often deals with the fallout from the Trojan War and all the suffering, and especially the plays of Euripides often take place among the women, refugees, those who have lost their homes, the vulnerable, essentially, who suffer the worst tragedy. But Helen ain't got no respect in a lot of these tragedies, man. There's some in which she does, but some in which she's just totally besmirched and dragged through the mud. In fact, so much so that the sophist Gorgias, one of the people that Socrates engaged with, the sophist Gorgias, had to write a whole speech in defense of Helen. And this was a shocking, kind of edgy, fedora-wearing, Reddit bro countercultural thing for Gorgias to do, because it was taken for granted that Helen was the villain of the story. And it was taken for granted that she somehow wanted to, or she was asking for it when she was taken away by Paris. It's totally not clear in Homer, by the way, that that's what happens. Homer is much more ambiguous about whether Helen wants to be with Paris or not. She seems to deeply regret everything that's happened, and she seems like more of a victim of fate and circumstance in Homer than in the later tradition. But in the later tradition, there's absolutely no charity given to her. She's not spared. There's a great moment in the Agamemnon, which is by Aeschylus, so an earlier tragedian, in which Helen's name is the source of all these puns, because in Greek, the name Helena sounds like all of these hell compounds that mean basically taking or seizing. So to be, for instance, Heleptolis is to be the seizer or the destroyer of a city. So she's the sacker of cities. She's the destroyer of men. She is Eleos and Helios and all of these different compounds that mean basically she was aptly named because she is the destroyer. And sometimes in translations you'll see this as like, oh, Helen, yes, she was hell for us. She was hell for men. So this is punning, and she's just identified with destruction and with destructive feminine wiles from there on out. And this is kind of a case, it's interesting because Virgil's going to engage with this in just a second. It's kind of a case of an individual character getting steamrolled underneath her symbolic function. So as a symbol in the story, Helen is the root, in some sense, of all evil, or at least she's part of this dysfunctional problem. Paris also has a lot of the blame, I think, but Helen's kind of there to symbolize something. She's there to stand in for all the disaster and ruin that can come from misguided sexual desire. But as a human character, she gets kind of hard done by. She's not fully realized as a human because of her role as a symbol, and she's not given enough charity and attention because she has to stand in as the people need somebody to blame. We need this idea of the beautiful seductress who destroyed the city, and so she gets cast in that role, even though there's kind of more to it than that. And that's what Virgil is now going to bring us to grips with, crucially, because the question for Aeneas at hand is, can he make Helen into a sort of scapegoat, into a sacrificial victim for all of the tragedy that he is now facing? And he's very tempted to do it. This quivering girl, he wants to take her and just slit her throat so that he can somehow have somebody to take all of this out on. And the reality is going to turn out to be, and this is important for us now as we think about blood guilt and sacrifice, which are major themes of our politics, you actually can't make a human individual stand in for the tragedies of history. You can't take a person, a unique soul, even if that person is flawed, as we all are, even if there are arguably cases to be made against that person, it won't do any good. It won't erase the tragedy to try to add more bloodshed on top of that. And that is the message, essentially, that is delivered by none other than Venus. Remember, this is Aeneas' mother, the goddess Aphrodite in Greek mythology, now transformed in Virgil into someone much more regal and sensible. So there's real irony here, because Aphrodite is the goddess who gives Helen all of her charm in Homer, and in some ways she is the jailkeeper of Helen. She has taken Helen and kind of ensnared her in this tangle that is all about her looks. She's so beautiful and it's great, but it's also a curse. It's the kind of curse that we see in movies like, if you've seen The Substance, one of these new movies about what it's like to be an actress. It's like Demi Moore plays this character who's made a living off of her looks, and so when her looks start to go, this is a horrible crisis for her. It's an identity crisis. Helen is also kind of caught in that same trap, and it's Aphrodite in Homer who represents all of that sinister stuff. But here, she's going to intervene and say, enough. It's enough of this. This girl is really just a pawn in a grander design. And you, Aeneas, can't get caught up as a pawn too by trying to take out your revenge on this girl. You can't get snarled up in this he said, she said, tit for tat. You have a bigger task ahead of you. And so here's what she says. She intervenes, and really here she's almost cast in the role of Athena in the Iliad when she pulls Achilles back by the hair and stops him from slaughtering Agamemnon right then and there when he steals Briseis. This is a moment when Athena there, and here Venus kind of intervenes to stop what would be a premature or disastrous act of retribution, because there's a bigger plot at stake here. So I've translated a portion of Venus' speech for you. As usual, I'm using the Alexandrine line, which is 6 feet, 12 syllables in iambics. So short, long, da is the basic unit. And I'm translating so that we can get a kind of fresh take on the poem. And here's what Venus says. She calls him Nate, which is exactly what she said to Cupid, her other son, and when she sent him down to wreak havoc on Dido. And now she's giving that same title to Aeneas. She says, Nate, my son, what hurt is strong enough to feed this rage, this boundless fury? Where is all your tenderness? Or has the love you bear me faded from your mind? Won't you first of all go looking for your father, drained by age, Anchises, whom you left behind? Is your wedded wife, Creusa, still alive? Your boy, Ascanius? The Greeks are everywhere, and they're surrounded, glinting blades on every side. If my protection hadn't staved off their demise, the burning flames would even now have swept them up. They would be sword meat for your enemies already. Helen's looks, though you despise them, aren't to blame, nor Paris. It's the gods. Now, this is key. This is utterly crucial. And it's an answer from Virgil to a major question that has hovered over the literary tradition up to this point, which is, who is Helen in the sweep of epic history, in this grand story, this God-ordained struggle of nations and peoples? Who is this little girl that has been such an enigma, such an object of desire? Is she villain or victim or what? And Venus' answer, she's just a slip of a thing. She's just a pitiful little being. And she isn't, as a human, the enormous thing that she's been made out to be. She's not her legend. I think here, this is a funny comparison, but I think here of the movie that just recently came out about Bob Dylan, A Complete Unknown, because that's a movie about the relationship between this guy, whose actual name was Zimmerman, this little kind of nebbish of a dude, that person, and then this giant entity called Bob Dylan. And the question really is, who is Bob Dylan? Well, he's a complete unknown. Nobody is Bob Dylan. Nobody can live up to what we've made Bob Dylan out to be in our legends about him. Similarly, says Venus, nobody can be who Helen has been made out to be. No human can bear that weight of being that legend. And you, Aeneas, can't bear the weight of sacrificing her for her sins. This is not the way that you have been called to go. Instead, look to the gods. Understand yourself as part of this larger cosmic story. And she lifts this veil from Aeneas' eyes, and he suddenly sees these hulking, dark shapes of these violent gods fighting and battling and slaughtering all over Troy. And he comes to realize, oh, this is much vaster than Helen. This is bigger than Helen. And in some ways, it's recovering the Homeric tradition from this tragic idea of the tragedians that Helen is the great sacker of cities, the great slayer of men. If you remember from the Iliad in Book 3, we have this encounter between Helen and Aphrodite, in which Aphrodite basically treats her as a plaything, as a toy. And Helen is very afraid of Aphrodite. She says, are you going to carry me off now to some new bustling city, to Phrygia, or to the enchanting town of Maeonia? Is some new favorite of yours there? Some eloquent man, since now Menelaus has beaten the blessed Alexander? So, in other words, Helen feels like a puppet, like a rag doll in the hands of Aphrodite. And Aphrodite kind of treats her that way. She says, don't provoke me, you wretch, or I'll cast you aside in my anger. Then I'll despise you as fiercely as now I still love you. I'll make sure you suffer grim hatred on all sides from Trojans and Greeks. Then you'll really know what it's like to suffer an evil fate. This prophecy comes true, right? It comes true in the Greek tradition that we've just been talking about, these tragedies in which Helen becomes the object of scorn and fury and blame for everything that's ever gone wrong. But, and this is why Homer is a great artist, we see in Homer that it's not really because of who Helen is, it's because of what Aphrodite is doing. It's because of how Aphrodite is using her as a pawn, as a rag doll. And that's what Virgil is remembering here, and he's doing it in the person of this much more elegant and austere Venus, whom he's trying to elevate above the sort of tawdry character that she has in Homer. And now Venus is all magnanimity. She's saying, this is a cosmic story, and you, Aeneas, have to play your part in that cosmic story, which is the first spark that we get in this poem, in Aeneas' journey of realization that this tale carries on far beyond the boundaries of the Homeric story, that this is a vista which is opening up far greater than anything we previously might have had in mind. And for Aeneas, there's a whole new world opening up. There are implications of this that he won't work out for books and books and books to come, that he's not fated to die in Troy. He's not supposed to just kill every Greek he can get his hands on. In fact, that part of the story is now coming to a close. And whatever debts and guilt and blood guilt and grief, whatever there is in that, and this enormous weight of suffering, that is going to be put to rest now. And Aeneas has a new job, another job, which is to go back and find his family. And that's kind of the heart of it for now, although there's much more significance to it that we will unfold and discover. But the key point here is it's about letting go. It's about leaving these small characters behind. It's about deflating the grand Homeric story and seeing it for what it is, which is just one human drama, and entering into this grand new Virgilian story where the concerns stretch eons beyond anything that Troy has been or will be. This is about more than puny humans, and Aeneas has to subordinate his own human desire for revenge to the role that he's now being asked to play in this cosmic drama. This is a major growing up moment, and I would even suggest that it can stand in for something we all live through at some point. We all get wrapped up in our little times of life. The season we're going through always feels like the most important thing. And I always relate this to the YouTube video. If you've seen the early YouTube video, David After Dentist, where David is this little kid who's been to the dentist and he's kind of waking up from the drugs that he's been on. So he's really loopy and he's totally disoriented, doesn't understand. He's in the back of the car. He's looking out and he has this heartbreaking line where he says to his dad, "Is this going to be forever?" Because he's asking, is this state that I'm currently in, is this going to be forever? And we're kind of all like that all the time. We are all David After Dentist. Right now, I'm consumed with revenge against that guy. That how can I ever move past the woman who cheated on me or the hurt I've been through or the project that I'm working on right now that feels like the most important thing. And when we pull back the camera, if we realize that we're not actually the center of the universe, but we're actually embedded into a larger story, then suddenly we start to think about our family and our roles that we play and our responsibilities to others, like our spouse and kids and parents, and fitting ourselves into that bigger picture. That's what Aeneas is doing right now. He's having that growing up moment that we all have. And what you give up when you have that growing up moment is you give up your immediate desire, the thing you want most right now. I want revenge for this killing. I want this promotion. I want this job. So you give that up. You surrender that to fortune and to God. But what you get is destiny. You get a purpose and you get a place in a grand tapestry. And that's what Aeneas gets too. And this drama is played out in the highest, most elevated possible terms, because Aeneas' destiny is vast. It's epoch-making. It's stretching down the eons and centuries. We're still, in some sense, living in the legacy of Aeneas' destiny because we still live with the after effects of the Roman Empire. But what he has to give up is all this weight of personal desire, the immediate desire that he has to slaughter Helen. But now we're going to discover also much more costly things that he has to give up about Troy, because he can't take all of Troy with him. He can't take all the buildings that are now burning. He can't take his fellow citizens. He can't take Priam, who is now dead. And although he can take some of his family, he can't take Creusa. So that is the next drama that happens as he makes his way back home. And he finds these three loved ones that he's talked about. He leaves the comrades that he's been fighting with so far, so they're going to go off and prepare to escape. But he's going to try to get these family members with him to go on that journey. And he finds when he gets home that they're all there, but Anchises, his father, has turned his face to the wall. He's saying, "This is the end of the line for me. I have lived to an old man in Troy. I'm going to die here in Troy." And it's, again, just as Aeneas thought that it might be his job to die in Troy, it's very reasonable for Anchises to say, "This is the end of my story." And what changes his mind is a sign from heaven. This is described in the Latin as a monstrum, but that word is not quite the same as we mean when we say monster, although they are related. A monstrum in Latin is a portent. It's something fearsome and awesome, but also significant and consequential. In this case, it's good news. So I've translated this passage to, I'm just going to read to you here my version of this. "Then suddenly a fearsome portent was reared up, wondrous to tell. Within our arms, before our eyes, behold, a subtle flame appeared to be poured down from heaven's apex to the crown of Iulus' head. So this is a jet of flame that comes down and encircles the top of the head of Ascanius, the son, Iulus, while we, his grieving parents, watched. So Aeneas and Creusa are here with their boy. They're trying to figure out what to do. They're trying to convince their father, or Creusa's father-in-law, to escape with them. But suddenly this intervention from heaven comes. The second one, after Venus' speech, we have this new intervention. And harmlessly, with gentle touch, the fire curled around his temples, licking at his hair. In panic, terrified, we scrambled in our rush to douse the sacred flames. But in delight, Anchises, with paternal eyes raised up toward the stars, stretched hand and voice to heaven. Jupiter omnipotent, if you are moved or influenced by prayer at all, look down on us. If pious faithfulness has earned us anything, then grant us aid and keep these things foretold secure. So it's very moving, this little domestic scene of a totally human reaction that Aeneas and Creusa have when they see their kid with his hair catching on fire, his head's on fire. They rush to put it out, try to find water. You can imagine them scrambling in panic around their little home. But Anchises, who's lived and seen and contains the ancestral wisdom of the house, he looks on this as a portent, which is what it is, a sign from heaven. And of course, Virgil is putting this in here to flatter Augustus, or in a kinder way of saying it, to acknowledge the connection that the line of the Caesars has to this great moment. This is a declaration from heaven that the line of Iulus will eventually produce a line of kings, will rule the world with kingship from heaven. So this is in some sense divine right of kings, and it changes Anchises' mind. It shows him, as Aeneas has just been shown, that there's a bigger destiny at play here. And so he's going to consent to be carried out along with the Lares and Penates. And now they're on the move. And so this is a key portion, because I mentioned that Creusa is sometimes thought of as having been given short shrift here, that people think Aeneas just leaves Creusa to die. But that's actually not true at all. Aeneas is one guy, right? He's got a certain amount of bandwidth and physical strength. He needs to carry his father on his back, because his father is old and feeble, as Venus has just reminded us, drained by age. The boy is young and needs shelter and protection, and they have to carry these statues of the household gods. And in this picture is contained the whole portrait of what it means to found a Roman household, right? We've got the ancestral memory, the wisdom of Anchises, we've got the cultural divine piety of the Lares and Penates, and we've got the future of the city, the future generation in Ascanius. So with Anchises, Ascanius, and the Lares and Penates, we have this generational picture of all that can be rescued, this little kind of time capsule of the falling city that will now be used as kind of a seed to bring more fruit forward. So why not Creusa? Why doesn't Aeneas stick with Creusa? You could say, well, it's because she's not important to that picture. But of course, the opposite is true. It's because she is a co-partner with Aeneas as the other side of this household. It's she and Aeneas who are raising this boy, and she can fend for herself. She's an adult, so she's being asked to shoulder her side of this, which is basically Aeneas is saying, well, I'm taking care of this, you take care of your own survival. They're kind of doing like a divide and conquer in a way that's very recognizable to modern mothers and fathers. Now, that's not to say that the Romans had the same ideas about men and women that we have. They did think that the male line was the important line, and that descent was key and crucial. But Creusa is not being abandoned here to die. She's being given an assignment within the context of her household. And it's in that context that she meets with what she accepts as her fate, her part of this journey. So Aeneas actually is determined to take Creusa on. In fact, he's so determined that when he arrives at the shore and finds his comrades ready to depart and escape, he notices that Creusa's nowhere in sight. So he's got the other members of his family, but he thinks, where's my wife? Where's my beloved Creusa? And she's so important to him that he goes running back. He goes tearing his way yet again back into danger, throws himself into the wreckage and the ruin of the city to try and find his wife, his partner in this endeavor. But alas, sorrow of sorrows, she is already dead. And this is the part that I'm just not over, because he meets with her ghost. And Virgil says that the ghost is larger, greater in the imago, in the sort of ghostly image than she was in life, which is why I sort of think of this as the Blade Runner scene with this giant looming woman over this man. But she's like that looming woman in another way, which is that in Blade Runner, Joy has a kind of protective aura. She's presiding over and guiding the life of Kay. And Creusa here gives that blessing to Aeneas and gives him strength where he has none. She plays a crucial role because in her part of the story, she's realizing that the gods have put an end to her journey. So each one of them now is kind of accepting, understanding that they have more obligations than just to satisfy what they would like. Aeneas would like very much for Creusa to come forward, but she can't. Creusa would surely like to carry on and see the future of their kid, but she can't. And Chryses wanted to turn his face to the wall and die, but he can't. He has to shepherd the new generations forward with his wisdom. Everybody is being confronted with the obligations that come from their position in life, in the family, and in this journey of destiny. And that's the whole point of this part of the poem, and of the poem more generally. Great things, living up to great destiny, requires loss, requires sacrifice, and no amount of revenge, no amount of bloodshed, nothing you can do, no act of slaughter, killing Helen won't fix it. Nothing's going to get that tragedy erased. And Aeneas is discovering painfully in this moment, there's nothing he can do to escape the tragic nature of his destiny. There's nothing any of us can do to escape the fact that in the course of our lives, we have to leave some things behind and give some things up. Sometimes they're taken from us forcibly. Sometimes we choose to give them up, as we do now in this season of Lent. Whatever happens, whether we choose it or not, life will take things from us. And our judgment, in some sense, the evaluation of our lives, the final assessment or analysis of how we live is going to be how gracefully we respond to that loss. And Creusa here is a model of that grace, because what she says to him as a ghost from beyond the grave is that, yes, of course, I love you so dearly. I wish I could come forward, but it was not to be. I have now passed on into the underworld, and it's part of the god's plan. It's part of making room for this new expedition, this new journey, and she stands in then as a symbol for everything he has to leave behind. And she makes this heart-wrenching speech, which is going to, I think, prefigure the heart-wrenching speech that Dido will make down the line, because all of this, as a love story within a war story, all of this is keying us in to the ultimate ring composition when Dido comes back around, when we wake up from this dream that we're telling, when we come back to the present, the literary present of the poem. We're also going to have another moment, even a bigger moment, you could say, where Aeneas has to leave things behind. But here we have Creusa, and I've translated her speech to her, this last portion of it. She says, "But as for me, the mighty mother of the gods has set my limit at these shores. And now, goodbye. Preserve the love we share by cherishing our son." And after giving me these words, she left me there, in tears and longing still to say so many things, but she receded on the wind. 3 times I tried to throw my arms around her neck in an embrace, 3 times in vain. The vision slipped between my fingers like the wind, like dreams that flit away with sleep. This is a classic image. It comes from the Odyssey, book 11, in which Odysseus is in the underworld. He's meeting all the dead heroes, and he's meeting the shades of all these different people, and he finally meets his mother, who he learns has died of a broken heart, essentially pining away, waiting for him to return. Anticlia is her name, and he tries to embrace her, but 3 times he reaches out and he discovers that the souls of the dead don't have bodies, so he can't. And that is what's happening here. That's the reference point here. And so Creusa, in a lovely touch, because of her association with Odysseus' mother, she kind of becomes the mother of the future here. She's the mother, obviously, directly of Iulus, of Ascanius, but she's also the mother of Rome in absentia. She's giving a kind of spiritual or metaphorical birth to Aeneas' future by sending him on his way. And he's not ready. It's not like his choice that this should happen. He says, 3 times I tried to throw my arms around her. She left me behind in tears and longing still to say so many things. Lacrimantet multa volentem dicere deseruit. She left me behind in tears and wanting still to say so many things, but she receded on the wind, and tenuisque recessit in auras. In the subtle breezes, she's almost wafting away like smoke. Just a gutting scene. If you can get through this and not be moved, then I don't know, your heart is made of stone or something. But it stands in for everything that Aeneas is now going to have to do. This is when Aeneas comes to grips, learns the nature of his task, learns what is up ahead of him, and it's only going to get more tragic from here, and grander, and greater, and his destiny will grow, and he will submit himself to the gods, but at greater and greater cost. And he doesn't like it. It's not something that immediately he embraces. This is how, I said at the beginning that we were going to learn here how it is that Aeneas becomes the broken man that we meet in Book 1. This is how. This is the sacrifice he has to make. It's greater by far than the blood guilt of Helen or anything like that. This is the cost of founding Rome. That's it. We've made it to the end of Book 2. What happens then is that basically Aeneas mirrors the experience that Dido tells of. When Dido fled from Tyre, she had all these comrades that gathered together in the night to escape. Aeneas now has this too, and it's a surprise to him. There are all these people suddenly that want to follow him, and it's like his destiny is just there ready-made. He shows back up on the shore. He said goodbye to Creusa. He's in mourning. He's terribly broken, but then there is the work to be done. There is awaiting him this duty and this destiny, which is another kind of consolation. When we give things up for our destiny, we have the work, even in the grief, right, to do before us. That's what happens here, and he's kind of alarmed, shocked to find it, and that's going to be his stance from here on, is that he's just going to get this giant task handed to him, book after book after book, and it's not really until book 6 that he's going to finally come to grips with it. So now we've embarked upon this. This was the cost of founding Rome. We will pick it back up next time when we start with book 3. But now we have a few fun bits of business to cover. First of all, of course, we have It Figures. I like at the end of every episode, if you just want to cover the story, then that's what we'll do at first, and we've been doing that this whole episode. But I also like to talk about literary technique, and especially to give you language, words for naming different literary techniques. This is something I'm discovering with my students too, that when you know these tropes, they're called, or topoi sometimes, when you know these figures of speech that can be defined and identified, you can see other people using them. You know their effect, and you can be more wary and canny when somebody tries to use a figure of speech on you, and you can also employ language more effectively. So things like praeteritio, where you mention something by not mentioning it, which is one of the ones we've covered before. That's an effective tool in certain circumstances, and you can see it being used. I mentioned the example of White Lotus, the latest season of White Lotus. The ladies in that are always doing praeteritio. Today I want to tell you about another fun word, and that's polysyndeton. I've talked already once before about anaphora, which is repetition for effect. Polysyndeton is slightly more specific. It's a piling up of conjunctions. So conjunctions are the little words that hook different clauses together, things like and, but, for. When you hear somebody say no ifs, ands, or buts, those are conjunctions. The ands and buts are conjunctions, and polysyndeton is yes, ifs, ands, and buts. Lots of ifs, ands, and buts. And it's almost like a sort of superabundance or an excess of different conjunctions. And we get that in the first passage I alluded to here, when Aeneas remembers the 3 whom he's left behind. Suddenly, there came to my mind three different people, Creusa and Iulus and my father and Chryses. And it's a list that we get in sequence. Subiit cari genitoris imago ut regem aequavum crudeli vulnere vidi vitam excellantem subiit deserta Creusa et direpta domus et parvi casus Iuli respicio et quae sit. There's like an and. I remembered Creusa, and I remembered my abandoned house, and I remembered the fate of small Iulus. This is what polysyndeton is, and it creates here, obviously, an effect of piling things up one after the other. And it's very effective in that moment because Aeneas has just been shocked into that recollection by the sight of Priam, and there's kind of a moment of stillness, and then suddenly one thing comes piling on after the other, after the other, after the other. This is the kind of thing you might do if you're trying to create an impression that there's lots of things happening at once. Or if you wanted to say, well, you have all sorts of options. You could go to the movies this afternoon, or you could sit and read a book, or you could play a video game, or you could write something. If you were trying to talk to your kid and your kid's like, I'm bored, you're like, well, you can do all sorts of things. You can do this, or you can do that, or you can do that. That's polysyndeton, and it's an effective rhetorical technique for adding, layering on more and more stuff. There's other things you can use it for, of course, as well, but the effect here is usually one of increase and abundance. And we almost have here, we don't quite have it, but we will have another example of this later on. We almost have what's called tricolon crescens, which is a particular figure where you have three things that get bigger and bigger and bigger. And this, and then also this, and even on top of that, this too, right? So this is a way of basically emphasizing the muchness of the muchness. And we get it used here very effectively, and you can use it next time your kid tells you he or she is bored. Okay, that's it figures. And now, before I close us out with the mailbag, I want actually to give us an update on Movie Watch. We've been talking on this show about Christopher Nolan's adaptation of the Odyssey, which is coming up, and we've been getting more and more details about it, and I have been going on a roller coaster of emotions. It's very, very intense when somebody makes an adaptation of classic literature, because I love classic literature so much, and I feel like movie adaptations of it often aren't very good. I got all excited for The Return, which was the Ralph Fiennes Odyssey movie, and then it turned out to be kind of a dud, in my opinion. I didn't like it very much. That was very disappointing, so I've been burned before, but now Christopher Nolan has come out with the announcement that he's making an Odyssey. And Nolan is, first of all, one of our great directors. Second of all, an epic director, somebody who likes to tell big, dramatic, indeed sometimes supernatural or sci-fi stories. And one of my big complaints is that people always take the supernatural out of this stuff. They take the gods out and so on and so forth. And so I've been watching like a hawk to see all the different news developments, and he's announced the different cast lists, and some people have been very down on it, just like automatically kind of poo-pooing anything that comes up. There was recently an image of Matt Damon as Odysseus, and everybody got mad because he's wearing the classic so-called Greek helmet with the horsehair crest, and that is a real helmet that existed, but Odysseus didn't use that kind of helmet, so people, military nerds got mad about that. That kind of stuff, I have to tell you, just doesn't bother me all that much. Hollywood gonna Hollywood. You're gonna get the image that looks most iconic, that people think will look most like the Greeks, even if it's not the most historically accurate. It's a poem, it's a myth, it's a story, that's fine. But I have been a little nervous about the casting, about the people involved, because there are some people like, Lupita Nyong'o, who I think is a great actress, but it's like, who's she going to play? And we've been burned in casting before. So when Zendaya is named, people get very annoyed because people generally kind of love to hate on Zendaya. And it's sort of like, is this going to be like Kitty Odyssey? Why is Tom Holland of Spider-Man fame in here? Shouldn't we have sort of more like studly, mature actors? So there's a very important development, and I wanted to give you my thoughts and feedback on it real quick, which is we have a cast list now for the major roles in this movie, and I have to say, I am feeling pretty white-pilled about it. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm like back on my excited for this movie kind of kick. There's a couple different reasons for this. We already knew that Matt Damon is going to play Odysseus. I think that's a decent choice. I think Odysseus is old enough, but also heroic enough. Or rather, Matt Damon is old enough and heroic enough to play this pater familias coming home. He's not the grizzled Ralph Fiennes type. He's more of the action hero type. But Damon is actually getting up there now, so I think he looks okay in these promo shots. Very, very relieved to discover that Tom Holland is going to play Telemachus. There was some rumbling that he was going to have a very major role, which he may still. They may focus on the opening 4 books of the poem in which Telemachus plays a big role. But Tom Holland is the fresh-faced, young, coming-of-age kind of guy that we would want in that role, not in the role of Odysseus. So for a while, I was worried he was going to be Odysseus. We can set those fears to rest. Anne Hathaway is going to be Penelope. So this might be a bit of a divisive one. I'm not so sure, but I think Hathaway has just the right kind of willowy, longing, faraway look in her eyes to play Penelope. So I think it's especially good because it suggests that we're not going to get like feminist Penelope. We did sort of in The Return. We got Juliette Binoche as this strong, severe Penelope who sort of condemns her husband's warlike nature and just doesn't really fit with the actual story, which is literally that she is the picture of wifely fidelity and patience. And that's the corresponding kind of answer to Odysseus' manly daring do. So I like Anne Hathaway. Now, here's the really juicy one, and this is fascinating. Zendaya, the one that everybody's been kind of antsy about, is playing Athena. Now, on the micro level, not sure how I feel about this. I guess the gods are typically eternally young, so the fact that Zendaya is young isn't the worst. I'm not so sure that Zendaya has the gravitas to play this. She tends to, when she's supposed to be dramatic, when she's supposed to be epic, Zendaya tends to just get very like scowly and pouty and shouty. So I don't really know if that's going to be the best performance necessarily. I could be wrong. It seems a little bit But here's the real thing, is the fact that Athena is in this movie at all. So in a macro level, this rules, because kicking the gods out of the story is one of the big, big problems that I've had before with adaptations. And so I'm not like jumping up and down about Zendaya's Athena, but I am jumping up and down about Athena in this movie. So thumbs up for that. Charlize Theron is going to be Circe. She kind of looks the part, right? Circe, the seductress, the witch, the temptress. I like that. Seems good. Lupita, one of my favorite actresses, is playing Clytemnestra. This is also very interesting because she's alongside Benny Safdie as Agamemnon. Now, Clytemnestra and Agamemnon do not play big roles in the Odyssey. We talked about them when we did our Odyssey series, but they don't really show up in the major way that they do in the tragedies. They're more of a kind of background motif. They're important because they show the opposite of Penelope, right? Clytemnestra is Penelope's opposite. She's the unfaithful wife who waits in ambush, and in the Aeschylus version of the story, she's the driving factor behind the execution of Agamemnon. So it looks like Nolan is planning to incorporate that myth and maybe even the tragedy, the later parts of the story, into his Odyssey, which could be pretty cool. And I think Lupita Nyong'o would be an amazing, vengeful, murderous Clytemnestra if that's the route that he wants to go with it. So I really hope that is going on. I think that's a kind of a cool choice, and it tells us a little bit more about the shape of this movie. There's going to be a divine element in it. There's going to be more kind of embroidery from around the epic cycle and from the stories that are only mentioned in Homer. And generally speaking, I'm pretty happy with this cast structure. I think I'm still on the like thumbs up train. Cautiously optimistic always, but it's 2025. It's morning in America. Lame and depressing and desacralized versions of the classics were rejected at the ballot box. Instead, we're getting Christopher Nolan and Athena and Clytemnestra and all that good jazz. So, exciting news. Hopefully won't be burned yet again, won't be disappointed, but wanted to update you guys since I know we've been following that story together. And finally, the mailbag. Mailbag questions come to me at rejoiceevermore.substack.com. I would love to hear your questions. If you want to DM me, send me a note, any way you you prefer to get in contact, but subscribing to the Substack is the main thing. You got to subscribe to the Substack to get in the mailbag at rejoiceevermore.substack.com. And here is Vincenzo, who is asking about the Punic Wars. You may remember that when we talked about Carthage and Dido, we talked about the grand conflicts between historical Rome and historical Carthage. Carthage was this North African empire, and it went into war with Rome as it was growing as the kind of upstart empire. And Vincenzo asks, why no cultural influence from the more advanced Carthage on Rome in the way the Greeks had, culturally and language-wise? We still have lots of Greek and Italian today. Was Rome too young and ignorant? Or was Carthage not cultured enough or reluctant for any reason? Thanks. Great work. Keep it up. Okay, awesome. This is a very cool question. So we've talked a lot about how Greece exerted this enormous influence, this anxious influence upon Rome, and Rome became Hellenized in all these ways and was just riveted by Greek culture, and the Roman elites were very excited about getting Greek culture. They thought it was very cool and elevated and sophisticated to be Hellenized. Not so much. You don't get all of these moralists warning against becoming too Punic, too Carthaginian. And I think there are a number of reasons for this, all of them instructive. So for one thing, every culture is known for different strengths and skills. Just like today, if you think France, you might think cuisine, you might think literature, the novel, but you don't think haiku. You don't necessarily think guns, right? There's stuff that France doesn't produce and stuff that France does produce. Similarly, when you think Carthage, there's some things that you do think and some things that you don't think about. And I would suggest that we're looking in the wrong places if we're looking for Carthage to pass down literary, philosophical influence like the Greeks did. That's what the Greeks were known for. They had world-class literary exports, especially from Athens. And so it makes sense that this major, and it's hard to overstate how much they dominated the imagination with their culture. They actually had a world-class culture, the Greeks did, and nowhere else was like that. Not Mesopotamia. I mean, the Jews were close, but they were really not very prominent in the Roman consciousness until much later on. So the Greeks did pass that down. The Carthaginians didn't have anything like that kind of culture that we know of. I mean, there may be texts that don't survive, but Carthaginian literature is really not very well attested. If it did have an influence, we wouldn't know about it because we don't have that stuff that has survived, and that in turn suggests that this was not a big part of that civilization. But there were major aspects of influence in other ways. For instance, the Carthaginians were the ones who introduced the Romans to seafaring. In fact, in the course of the war, the Romans realized that this naval power the Carthaginians had was a key asset in their domination of the Mediterranean. So they gradually, over the course of those wars, they developed a navy. They became a naval power. So that's in itself a military influence, to a certain extent a cultural, economic influence, really changed the shape going forward of Roman politics and Roman warfare. And then the other big one, which is so big we almost don't even notice it, is that the alphabet is Phoenician. So the Carthaginians are Phoenician. The Greek alphabet, the Roman alphabet, all come from an ancestor that we are pretty sure was a Phoenician ancestor. It was the Phoenicians in their travels around the world that bequeathed that alphabet to all these different cultures, including, we think, perhaps the Jews. The Hebrew alphabet is also demonstrably related to this parent alphabet, this father alphabet from Phoenician culture. And that, too, is a major part of Roman arts and letters, because once you have that great alphabet, you can communicate and record things much better than previously in the kind of italic versions of things that they had been using. So the Latin alphabet, which we still use, is also distantly a kind of Punic influence upon Roman culture and civilization. But you're right that they didn't have that literary tradition that we look to for the Greeks, in the same way that we don't expect the Italians to make great cheeseburgers. That's just not part of their culture. I mean, the Greeks do have this very specific claim to fame that has had an outsized impact. I mean, philosophy is more important than cheeseburgers, and you can put me on record saying that, even though I do love a good cheeseburger. But having said that, right, the Punic culture contributed to Rome's future in other ways. And this has to do with the distinctive elements of each culture and what happened when they finally clashed. All right, great mailbag question. Keep them coming. Send them in at rejoiceevermore.substack.com. Don't forget to rate and subscribe. Let people know about this show. Really helps me when you do that. Get in touch with me at Rejoice Evermore. And check out my book, Light of the Mind, Light of the World, Illuminating Science Through Faith. It's been a pleasure as always, and I will see you next time for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.